Fred Lewis had nothing left. His crew was fractured, his bank account drained, and every ounce of hope seemed to have been hauled out of the Yukon already. But instead of quitting, Fred did the unthinkable. He pushed his last dollar onto the table and rolled the dice on ground every other miner had dismissed as worthless. No safety net, no backup plan, just one final shot. At first it looked like another costly mistake. Weeks passed with nothing but mud, busted hoses, and mounting debt. Rivals shook their heads, whispering that Fred had finally gone too far, that this gamble would be the one that broke him for good. But then, color, not flakes, not dust, nuggets, buckets alive with gold so thick it choked the sluice. The ground that everyone swore was dead exploded into one of the richest jackpots in modern mining. When the cleanout totals dropped, jaws hit the dirt. $40 million. Overnight, the man written off as reckless had rewritten the season. Some call it blind luck, others pure desperation. But one truth is undeniable. Fred Lewis staked everything and walked away with a hoard that will haunt every miner who doubted him. If you want to see how this gamble turns into one of the most shocking discoveries in gold rush history, hit like and subscribe right now, because the story is only just beginning. The valley he chooses is no ordinary ground. It is a scarred landscape, haunted by the collapse of a dozen old shafts, pocked with rotting cabins and the rusting skeletons of machines abandoned more than a century ago. This was once the beating heart of the 1898 Klondike Stampede, and yet here, unlike anywhere else, the gold never fully surfaced. Some say the ground itself rejected those who tried. Others whisper of the last prospector who touched this land, a man named McAllister, who reportedly struck a river of gold in 1899 and then vanished without trace. His name lingers in old Dawson ledgers beside shipments of ore that never reached their destination, fueling speculation that millions were hidden and left to rot beneath this hostile soil. For Fred, the timing is brutal. His debts to suppliers are growing like weeds. His own crew, beaten down by season after season of disappointment, whisper doubts that his face and name will even return to the network's screens if this gamble fails. He frames this dig not as mining, but war. "I've fought battles before," he mutters to the cameras, his voice graveled with strain, "but this one decides my future." The Yukon wind howls around him like it heard the vow and wants to answer back. Even the earth seems to resist. Mudslides block trails, loose shale shifts beneath their boots, sudden gusts snap tarp and canvas like gunfire. Yet Fred insists. Destiny waits here. At night, around the fire, the stories deepen. Old miners drift in from town to shake their heads at his folly. One gray-haired local warns, "That hoard killed its last owner. Maybe it'll kill you too." They tell of McAllister's discovery, of wagons that vanished, of curses as old as the gold itself. Some laugh, some grow quiet, but the echo of those tales lingers. Rivals Tony Beats and Rick Ness mock him openly on camera. "Fred's digging up ghost stories while we're digging real ground." Fred listens, jaw tight, torn between dismissing the superstition and secretly wondering if it is the very reason the hoard remains untouched after more than a century. But his biggest obstacle is not the rivals or the cursed ground. It is the men beside him. His own crew mutters in private, frustration boiling over into talk of mutiny. We followed him through failure after failure. One voice hisses as the camera records their campfire arguments. This is suicide. Others complain of going unpaid, of debts they cannot shoulder if this claim collapses. Yet among them, a few remain defiantly loyal. They argue that Fred deserves this last shot, that his gamble may yet break the cycle of defeat. The tension is palpable. By firelight, the lens catches the crack of voices, the sharp snap of tempers, the uneasy silence of men on the verge of walking away. And then Fred steps forward. He does not shout. His voice wavers at first, then gathers force. "I'm betting my last dollar," he says, the flames glinting off eyes that refuse to break. "But I'm betting on us." There is a pause, heavy enough to crush hope. Slowly, against reason, against their better judgment, most stay, partly for loyalty, partly because the legend of the lost Hoard is stronger than fear. So they dig. What began as stubborn loyalty hardens into grim determination, each shovelful daring the earth to prove Fred wrong. The deeper they go, the stranger the ground becomes. Gravel from the pans no longer sparkles with faint, scattered flakes. It glitters with dense streaks of dust, heavy and thick, as though the very earth has been holding its breath for over a century. Fred crouches low, his hands trembling as he tips the pan beneath the Yukon sun. The gold catches the light in a way that blinds for an instant, not just specks, but real shimmer, dense enough to coat the ridges of the pan like fire itself. His voice cracks with disbelief. This ground owes us everything. The crew gathers around, eyes wide, their exhaustion forgotten in a heartbeat. Excitement surges through the camp like an electrical current, but with it comes unease. The thought none of them dares to say aloud presses into their chests. If this is the shaft from the McAllister story, then what doomed him? That's when a shout echoes from below. One of the men calls Fred into the tunnel, where a timber beam juts from the earth. Across it, carved deep into the rotting grain, are symbols no one can place. Not letters, not numbers, but spirals, slashes, and marks like runes gouged into the wood with deliberate force. Dust trickles as Fred brushes them clean, his breath caught. "What the hell is this?" he murmurs. The younger crew laugh nervously, but the older hands step back, muttering about coded warnings, about signs meant to keep men from going further. For the first time, belief hardens among them, not just in the Hoard, but in the possibility they've entered ground that was never meant to be disturbed. Still, Fred presses forward. The drift must be shored up, or it will crush them all. With rotting wood scavenged from abandoned cabins and steel scraps dragged from the valley floor, they brace the tunnel inch by inch. The beams groan under the weight of a century, their nails screeching as they bite into the rock. Fred insists on being the first inside, his boots sinking into muck as the headlamp beam cuts through the dark. Around him, the walls themselves shimmer. Veins of gold thread through the rock, so dense they sparkle even in weak light. Untouched, unclaimed, fortune frozen in time. For any miner, it's the kind of sight that erases doubt, the kind of sight that makes men forget fear. But their oxygen meters tell another story. Red bars dip lower and lower, the warning tones sharp in their helmets. Gas pockets, whispers say, pockets that kill before you even smell them. Fred doesn't pause. He waves off the protests, shoving deeper into the drift. "If this is where McAllister fell," he growls, his breath echoing in the tight shaft, "then I'll finish what he started." His crew plead, their voices tense, but his words sink hooks into them. He pushes ahead, every creak of the tunnel like a gunshot in the dark, every breath harder than the last. Sweat beads, dust chokes the air, the ground groans as though ready to close in. The oxygen thins, every inhale scraping like rust, and then Fred freezes. His lamp catches something the others don't. A line across the rock, jagged and deliberate. With picks and crowbars, they pry at the wall. Stone shifts, timber splinters, and suddenly the earth gives way in a shuddering cough of dust. The collapse almost comes, the roof sagging, the tunnel threatening to crush them. But instead of ruin, they are staring into a void beyond the stone. A chamber, sealed, untouched, hidden from the world for more than a century. They break through, boots crunching on dry gravel as light beams scatter across shapes in the dark. At first, it looks like rubble, debris left behind. But as their eyes adjust, the truth settles in like a storm. Crates, dozens of them, stacked and slumped against the far wall, their wood blackened with rot but still intact. Fred's breath comes in ragged bursts. He drops to his knees and pries open the first with his bare hands. The lid cracks, and what spills out is nothing short of staggering. Raw gold nuggets, each the size of a thumb, chunks of ore still streaked with quartz, and pouches that slosh with the weight of dust, stamped faintly with markings from 1899. The air shifts. No one speaks at first. They only stare, the light catching on millions in gold piled in the dark like treasure torn from myth. One crate becomes 2, then 3. The sheer volume is beyond belief, the equivalent of tens of millions, untouched, preserved. Fred's crew stand in stunned silence, their fears swallowed by the shimmer of fortune. For once, even the cameras catch no banter, no jokes, no words at all. Only the sound of nails ripping as crates give way to a hoard no one imagined could be real. But gold is not the only thing buried here. Against the far wall, beside the fortune, lie relics of the men who left it behind. Rusted rifles lean in a heap, barrels eaten by time. Boots stiff with decay sit where they were abandoned. And in the corner, tucked inside a half-rotted pack, a diary, its pages waterlogged but miraculously legible, ink bleeding yet still alive. Fred lifts it with both hands as though it weighs more than the gold. The first words, scrawled in a hand fading with desperation, speak of McAllister himself. The chamber feels different now, less like a mine, more like a vault, deliberately hidden, sealed, preserved. And with the gold comes not only wealth, but the ghost of the man who tried to claim it first. That ghost seems to press them forward, daring them to break the silence he left behind. The beam groaned as they pried it loose, and with one final shove, the far wall gave way like a wound in the earth. Dust and stale air poured out, choking their lungs, but what lay inside stopped every voice cold. Crates, dozens of them, stacked against the wall, rotted but still intact after more than a century. Fred was the first to step inside, his boots crunching on debris. He reached for a crowbar, forcing open a lid, and as the wood splintered, the Yukon past exploded into the present. Raw gold nuggets spilled into the lamplight, fist-sized and unpolished, gleaming with a fire all their own. Ore chunks clattered across the stone floor, heavy with promise, while pouches of gold dust, stamped with 1899 trademarks, spilled from the cracks. The crew stood frozen. For a moment there was no breathing, no sound, only the overwhelming reality of fortune staring back at them. The weight of it was staggering. Millions, tens of millions, a hoard so vast it seemed impossible it had lain hidden all this time. Fred's hands shook as he lifted a nugget, its rough surface biting into his palm. "This," he whispered, barely audible, "this is what we came for." But the chamber was more than gold. Rusted rifles leaned against the far wall, their barrels eaten by time. A pair of boots, leather shriveled and cracked, sat in the corner, as if their owner had vanished mid-step, and then, half buried beneath a collapsed crate, Fred pulled free a diary, its leather cover swollen with water, but still legible. By the firelight that night, the men turned the fragile pages, their voices hushed. The diary was McAllister's. His words painted a story of triumph and fear, of betrayal and silence. He wrote of the gold river he had struck, of crates he filled and sealed in secret, but also of shadows that followed him. "Others are watching," one entry read. "If I fail, it will be because of them." His last pages dissolved into frantic scratches, hints of a partner who vanished with maps, whispers of syndicates that ruled Dawson from behind closed doors. It was not just a prospector's account, it was testimony, A confession of wealth deliberately hidden, history written in panic and paranoia. Fred turned the book over in his hands, the words echoing in his head. He realized then that this wasn't just a strike. This was the rewriting of Yukon history itself. Every vein, every pouch of dust was a ghost from 1898, a fortune suppressed, concealed, perhaps even erased from the record. Experts were flown in, their instruments confirming what the naked eye already knew. The gold was untouched Klondike era, its texture, its assay, its dust ratio unique to the rush. They ran their fingers along the diary, each line verifying the madness of the age. And the deeper they read, the darker it became. Syndicates hiding gold to escape taxation, partners vanishing with maps, a network that controlled fortune and silenced those who discovered too much. The crew, once divided, now stood united. They looked at Fred differently, not as the desperate man burning his last dollar, but as the miner who had dragged a legend back from the dirt. One of them muttered, almost reverently, "Fred, you've pulled a ghost back to life." The chamber was no longer just a vault of riches. It was a tomb, a shrine, a frozen moment where greed, betrayal, and secrecy had been buried and sealed away. And now Fred had cracked it open. Word did not stay hidden for long. A whisper spread across the valley, through Dawson, through the Klondike itself. Rivals scoffed at first. Tony Beats laughed when he heard the rumor, shaking his head, calling it tavern gossip. Rick Ness dismissed it outright, telling his crew Fred was chasing shadows again. But then the footage surfaced. Grainy at first, shovel loads of raw gold spilling into buckets. Fred's crew staggering under the weight of pouches marked 1899. Then clearer, broadcast on networks, verified by experts. The chamber, the crates, the diary itself under glass. Tony watched from his office, jaws set tight. Cameras caught him muttering under his breath, the faintest flicker of respect breaking through. "The man gambled," he said finally, almost grudgingly, "and he won." Rick wasn't so calm. Alone in his cabin, eyes on the flickering screen, he admitted what pride had long kept buried. "I'd never have taken that risk," he said, his voice cracking, "and maybe that's why I'll never touch gold like that." The world moved quickly. Online forums erupted, dissecting every frame, every word of the diary. Was Fred a genius all along, a visionary who saw what others mocked? Or was he merely the luckiest fool in mining history, stumbling onto treasure at the very edge of collapse? Comment sections became battlegrounds. Fan pages turned into shrines. Hashtags lit across platforms. $, Fred wins. $, ghost gold. $, the last dollar strike. For the first time since he joined the show, Fred's name surged above Parker Schnabel's in global searches. But online noise was one thing. Proof would come only when the gold hit the scales. Nugget after nugget hit the trays, the metallic thud echoing louder than any victory bell. The numbers rolled higher and higher until the final total froze the room in silence. $40 million in raw gold, weighed and confirmed. Fred Lewis stood motionless, hands trembling, his face a mixture of disbelief and vindication. The same man who weeks ago begged for another chance, who pawned away his last savings, now stared at a fortune that dwarfed anything he had ever imagined. Around him, his crew erupted. Grown men who once cursed him behind his back now cried openly, clutching each other as if they'd been carried back from the dead. Cameras zoomed on Fred as he whispered through tears, "This was my last dollar." And it turned into 40 million more. The words spread like wildfire, replayed on news stations, clipped and shared online. In the roar of that moment, Fred Lewis was no longer mocked as a failure. He was the man who had snatched immortality out of the dirt. Phones rang before the scales cooled. Banks that had slammed doors in his face now scrambled to offer lines of credit. Investors who laughed him out of meetings lined up with desperate smiles. Even politicians called, eager to align themselves with the new face of resilience. Fred's transformation from ruin to resurrection wasn't just a story, it was a phenomenon. The Yukon itself seemed to vibrate with it, bars filling with cheers, rival miners watching the footage in disbelief. This wasn't just another cleanout. This was history, filmed live and carried by a man who had nothing left to lose. The media frenzy grew instantly. Old photographs of Fred's past resurfaced. The young Green Beret in combat gear, the struggling miner standing ankle-deep in mud with empty pans, the weary man on television mocked for yet another failed season. Now those same images were played side by side with towering crates of gold, the narrative rewritten overnight. The underdog had become the legend. Veterans reached out from across the country, sending messages that his gamble gave them hope, that his perseverance proved battles weren't only fought on battlefields. Fred's gamble became a metaphor, not just for mining, but for life itself. Crew members who once muttered about mutiny now sat for interviews, their voices steady and proud, saying they would have followed him anywhere. Men who weeks ago considered leaving without pay now claimed their place in folklore. The crew that stood in firelight, stayed when no one else would, and walked away as part of the richest strike in living memory. But beneath the celebration, shadows stirred. Whispers returned to the surface, the same whispers that haunted the valley for over a century. The diary found in the chamber lay open on a desk, its ink faded, but its meaning sharp. The gold is ours, but we are not alone here. Fred read the words aloud more than once, his voice trailing into silence each time. The same question spread through the camp like smoke. If McAllister truly found this hoard in 1899, why did he vanish within weeks? Some shrugged it off as the hazards of mining. Others grew uneasy, pointing to the strange carvings in the timbers, the odd markings like coded warnings no one could decipher. The more the crew studied them, the less they seemed random. And then came the accidents. First it was equipment, machinery inexplicably failing even after being checked, steel snapping where it shouldn't. Then came sudden gusts of wind in the shaft, extinguishing lamps without warning, leaving men in choking darkness. A winch cable snapped while lifting an ore crate, nearly crushing 2 workers. One miner swore he heard voices whispering in the chamber when no one else was inside. Conspiracy theorists online devoured the footage. Some claimed the hoard belonged to syndicates in 1898, secret societies who hid fortunes to escape government taxation. Others suggested it was covered up deliberately by powerful investors, the same names that appeared in half-erased shipping manifests from Dawson. And darker theories circulated too, that McAllister wasn't betrayed by a partner, but silenced for uncovering a treasure that was never meant to see daylight. Fred dismissed some of it publicly, but privately the weight pressed down. He sat long after the crew slept, staring at the crates stacked neatly like a vault, gold shimmering under lamplight. He thought of the diary's final line, written in a trembling hand, and wondered if McAllister felt the same pressure, the same dread, just before he disappeared. Victory had brought fortune, but also a curse that could not be shaken. His men, loyal now beyond question, refused to leave, saying they had crossed the line from miners to history makers. But Fred knew history had teeth. Every ounce of gold came with the shadow of a story unfinished. When cameras rolled again, Fred didn't shout or boast. He stood silent, eyes fixed on the mountains outside, voice low as if speaking to someone unseen. "This may be my greatest victory," he said at last, "or the beginning of something none of us are ready for." The Yukon wind howled through the valley, rattling the abandoned cabins, carrying his words out into the darkness.